Welcome to the second of two screencasts looking at the flipped learning method that we're going to be using in both AS and A2 Sociology this year. And if you haven't already watched the first screencast on this topic, if you go back and watch that before you look at this video, and what we did in that first screencast is we explained what we mean by a flipped learning method, and we looked at some of the reasons that we think that this approach might be useful. What we're going to move on to look at in this particular screencast is how we go about implementing the flipped classroom in a way which is effective. And there are four areas that we're going to look at. Most importantly, you need to have really good note-taking skills to get the most out of the screencast. Secondly, you need to be able to ask interesting questions that are related to the videos. Thirdly, it's important that we have clear ground rules that are consistently and fairly applied to all students. And fourthly, I'm going to briefly mention a really clever internet tool that we're going to use to assess your understanding of the screencast called Sociology. So remember, before most sociology lessons, you'll be assigned a screencast, which is an online video lecture, like the one that you're listening to at the moment, that you have to watch before you come to your next sociology lesson. And for you to get the most out of those screencasts and to really watch them actively, it's really important that you take good quality notes. And we're expecting you to use a particular note-taking method that we feel is very useful. And it's called the Cornell note-taking method. And what you need to do for this particular method is divide the paper into 3 sections. And the easiest way of doing this is to draw an off-center eye, like the one that you can see on the screen on your paper. And then, so that you keep your notes in the right order and you keep yourself organized, make sure that you write the course name, the date, and the topic at the top of each page. So the topic will be the name of the screencast that you're making notes on. And then this large box on the right is for writing notes as you're watching the screencast. So as you're watching the video, you make your notes in this particular section. And the important thing is to make sure that you skip a line between ideas and topics, and that you don't use complete sentences. You want these notes to be relatively concise, and therefore you need to use abbreviations whenever possible. And then when you finish watching the screencast and you've made your notes in the right-hand side, you then need to reread these notes and then try to pick out what you think are the main ideas, so the key points, the key concepts, and write them in this left-hand column. In other words, what you're trying to do here is pick out single words or phrases that will trigger in your mind a whole lot of material that you've learned. So for example, in a sociology screencast, make sure that the key bits of jargon that are explained in the screencast are in this left-hand column. And obviously try to write these key terms next to the notes that are the most relevant. And then when you've done that, when you picked out what you think are the most important trigger words and phrases, the key points, you then need to write a summary at the bottom of your notes. So this would be a few sentences that sum up the most important points from the screencast. So the easiest way of doing this is to ask yourself the question, if I was going to explain this to someone else, what would I say? And then when you finish making your notes, don't just put them in your file and never look at them again. Keep on going back to them. Keep on regularly revising your notes. So read through the notes that you've taken in the right-hand column. And eventually you should get to the situation where you don't actually need to look at your more detailed notes, and you can remember a whole topic just by focusing on the trigger words and phrases that you picked out in the left-hand column. And here's an example of a set of Cornell notes that I prepared on the first screencast on the flipped learning method. So here are the notes that I made whilst I was watching that particular video, and then these are the key ideas that I picked out to put in the left-hand column, and this is my concise summary of the main ideas of that particular video. So this is an example of how you would lay out your notes. If you're still not completely clear about the Cornell note-taking method, if you have a look at Google, if you just put Cornell Notes into Google, you'll see lots of exemplars that will show you how to make notes using this very useful method. The second thing that I want to mention briefly is the importance of asking questions about the screencasts. So you're going to be able to engage much more effectively with the videos if you learn to ask interesting questions about that topic as you're watching the screencast. So for each video lecture, try to formulate at least one interesting question that you now have about the topic and bring that question along to the lesson. Thirdly, for this approach to work, there need to be ground rules that are consistently applied. And the most important issue here is that you must watch and make notes on the relevant screencast before you come to the lesson. So you're not going to be able to participate in the lesson activities unless you've done that preparation work beforehand. And then the last thing to briefly mention is a really useful online tool called Socrative. So provided that the Wi-Fi infrastructure supports this, we're going to make use of this online tool called Socrative to assess your understanding of the screencasts. So if you've got a smartphone, a tablet computer, a laptop, an iPod Touch, any device with a web browser, please bring that along to each sociology lesson, because that will enable us to use this very clever tool that we're explaining in more detail in the lesson. And if you've got a tablet computer or a mobile phone, it would be a really good idea to download the Socrative student app. So it's this one, the student clicker. So if you've got any questions about the flipped learning method that we're going to be using in sociology, please talk to a member of staff. And just before we finish, a quick reminder that you will get more out of the course if you follow the Park Sociology Twitter feed. So that's at Park Sociology, and you can search for tweets that are relevant to the topics that you're studying by using these hashtags.